Hey guys, welcome back. Hey guys, how's it going? I wanted to have a conversation today with you and with myself about business models. So it's not just business models, I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about the idea as an entrepreneur, as a creator, of choosing wisely, not just your topic, but the way that you are going to build a successful company around that topic, if that's what you're attempting to do. So an entrepreneur, basically by definition, all we're trying to do is create value and translate that value into something that another person would be willing to exchange money for. That's pretty much, the job. And if that's the case, there's lots of different ways that you can approach that. And one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm actually exploring a number of different business models, and they're surrounded by topics that I'm personally interested in. So what I'm trying to do is create something new and novel within a couple of different areas using different ways to package those solutions. And so I've been spending a lot of time researching and studying different business models for this very purpose, so that I could actually start to explore these. So my background, I've actually run a number of different companies in the past. And so I have some experience already that I'm bringing to the table. And I'll share with you just briefly the kind of businesses that I've already ran. And then I'm going to talk to you about the other businesses that I have not ran that I'm actually working on right now. And I'm going to give you some pros and cons to each one from my experience. Okay, this is just my perspective, my point of view. Obviously, other people are going to be, that might have had different successes or different experiences, are going to maybe have different perspective on this. But I think it's helpful to even think about this. So really the goal here, if you're listening is, or watching, is to basically think through this, because one of the things I realized is that when I was starting out, I actually didn't think through the business model at all. That was not even part of what I did. I would just basically be attracted to the concept or the idea, and then I would kind of go to the path of least resistance. So I'd basically take that idea and say, well, how would I provide the solution? What's a common way to provide the solution? And so maybe it's to sell like a product, or maybe it's to, provide a service. I never really understood the nuances of different business models have different responsibilities, have different structures, have different value in the market, and have different levels of difficulty or ease in order to set up or to run or even to sell. So I'm going to kind of briefly go through that. There's a couple of different things that I think I'll talk about briefly here with you. Okay, so let's begin. So background. As an entrepreneur, I have been involved as an entrepreneur in a number of different businesses. So there is, first of all, two different types. I'll say of entrepreneurs. There's I'll say a solopreneur, or a, almost like a freelancer, and there's business models around that type of thing. And then there's also businesses where you're basically running a company and you have a team, right? And I think there's a big distinction between those two things. I'm a fan of both. I think they both have huge pros and cons. So like everything, it's never black and white. So basically, I've done both. I've been a freelancer, an independent consultant, a solopreneur, a digital nomad. I'm actually moving slowly back into that direction with a couple of my projects right now. But I've also ran quote unquote companies where I've actually had, teams. In the past, all the main ones that I could, really kind of dive deep on personally from experience has been an agency. I've ran 3 agencies in my life at this point, digital agencies. So typically marketing and sales and building digital products have been the main things that those agencies have done. I've also ran a co-working company, which I founded with some partners, and which is basically, if you're not familiar with co-working, it's just simply shared workspace with a bunch of other companies that all, basically utilize the resources within that larger space, right? So it's like having a souped up office for your team without having all the overhead, because there's other people that are also using that space. I've also ran a venture-backed software as a service company, which is basically an app. in a lot of ways, we were trying to make it a marketplace. So it almost fit into two different business models because it started off as sort of an app that was serving one market, but the goal was to bring the other side of the market in and to monetize that ultimately. So that it became like a SaaS business that turned into a marketplace business. So I had some experience on like both of those things with that company. And then I've also ran a bunch of other digital products, like just small digital products that I've worked on independently. And then I've also done, it sounds like I've done everything. I've also done basically a physical product business. It was a food company, a food product. Okay, I think that covers it. So those are all the different things that I've done. So I've actually had quite a bit of experience. I've been doing this for almost like, well over a decade now. So, that just comes with the territory. I've tried a bunch of different things. Some have been successful, some have been like complete disasters and failures. Here's these different businesses, how I rate them. And I'm going to include some stuff that I'm working on now that I didn't just talk about. So there is basically being like an independent consultant. You can do like freelancing, you can be a coach of some type, you can be like a tutor. There's all sorts of different things you could do there. You could be basically anything that you're selling your time for money as a one-person operation, or maybe as a partnership. If you had one other person that was kind of working with you on that is what I would kind of consider more like a freelancer, solopreneur kind of vibe. Those businesses are really typically simple to set up. You've got skills. It's really easy for you to set them up. If you've got those skills, if those skills are something that add value to somebody else's life, make their life easier, they don't have to do that thing that you're doing for them, that maybe you find easy or you are really skilled at that they're not so skilled at, it's a great business to start because it's fast to start. There's typically very low overhead, and there's hardly any startup cost oftentimes with those type of businesses. And literally you can start them overnight. You can set up like a sales page, or start making cold calls, or if you have a network, you can start to pitch your contacts. So pros of that business is really easy to start. There's a lot of cons with that business too. I mentioned it, you're trading time for money. So it's one of those businesses where you are the product. And so if you decide to get sick, you're not deciding to get sick, but like if you get sick, guess what? Your business, income drops, right? If you get burnt out, if you take a vacation, there is workarounds to all this stuff. So I'm really generalizing here because obviously you could, have VAs or, virtual assistants or something that's sort of mitigating your downtime or whatever. But typically that's not what I find. Is a lot of times when you're running those businesses, you kind of take on a lot of everything on your shoulders. The other thing too is you're typically not good at everything in those businesses. So you have limited, sometimes, especially in the beginning, you have limited resources typically. And so you tend to do everything, even though you're only good at one or two aspects of that business, which is why bigger companies are so much more powerful, because they have a bunch of people that are really good at different things and they're working together on a common goal. So I think those are businesses that are really good to start with, but I don't actually think it's a good business to finish with, if that makes any sense. I think it's a good, like almost like a foundation to learn and to be a business person, but I actually think there's a lot of business that are much better. The other thing too is if you ever want to sell it, which is, entrepreneurs typically are making money, paying themselves a salary or taking a dividend or whatever, during the operations of the business. That's one way you make money. The other way, which is oftentimes much more valuable, is selling your business at some point in the future and getting that that one big payout that you can now use to have financial freedom, to do all the things that that you want to do without any ties to to actually working for that money anymore. So that is not something that you could typically do with that first business model I just mentioned. Okay, so moving on to the next one, you start a product. Okay, so actually I'm going to start with agency. So agency is basically kind of like taking that but adding a bunch of people to it. Right, so you're a freelancer or a consultant, and now all of a sudden you're a consultancy, or you're an agency, right? And so now all of a sudden you've got a bunch of other people that are kind of, like you, doing a bunch of different things. Maybe you're a designer. Like in my case, I was a designer, and then I had like a researcher and marketer, and then I had a developer, and we all sort of come together, and all of a sudden we're an agency, right? And so that is basically allowing you to basically have more work. That is more typically ambitious than what you can do alone. And it gives you typically more revenue because you can charge more, or you can at least do more projects. And it also starts to make you start feeling like more of a full business, because now you have, typically you can start off as a partnership. Oftentimes that's what I've done, but you can, start hiring people to fill in some gaps. As you scale the business out, you're not keep adding more partners. You're typically going to be adding more people, right? More staff. So advantages of that business is, again, it's really quick to start. And it has more revenue potential and more, value potential than typically the freelancer mode, that you can go. And it also has the benefit of the fact that you can work on more exciting, oftentimes ambitious projects that you don't need to have all the expertise for. And it starts to make you think about working with people to fill in the weaknesses of your strengths, right? Like, so you have weaknesses and you have strengths, so filling in the weaknesses to counterbalance your strengths. And that's a really healthy thing as an entrepreneur. The other great thing about that is if you systemize it and you do it properly, you can actually sell the business without you having to go along for the ride. Now, you're still trading time for money, so that's the disadvantage here. It doesn't have very high multiples. Multiples is just a fancy way of saying, when I sell the business, I typically calculate the revenue or the profit of that business. Typically, there's other ways to do it, but typically the revenue or profit of that business, and I'm gonna basically sell it for a multiple of that revenue or that profit over a number of years. And that's what I'm gonna get as a sort of a sale price, depending on if there's a buyer. Obviously, the theory here is that there's a buyer that wants your business is, has healthy metrics. I'm gonna do actually some content or basically share ideas around how to set up, from my experience again, how to set up a successful business versus a non-successful, because I've done both. A business that's very sellable versus a business non-sellable, but that's a whole other topic. Let's assume you've done that. This business is going to be able to be sold. Hopefully you don't have to stay with the business because you've set it up in such a way that you're not the linchpin, you're not the key man or key woman of the business that is required for the business to be successful to sell. So that's the pro and con there. There's other things, but those are the main ones. Next level up from there would be what I would call a productized service. So this is basically taking your agency and turning it into a almost like a product. So you're really simplifying and focusing in on doing one or two typically things really, really well. So my agencies have classically been full service. So we're kind of a jack of all trades. We're doing everything. You could even have a specialized agency that does everything for like a specific niche. And then you could also have an agency that's only doing one or two services, like I'm a Facebook ad agency, or I'm a development shop or whatever. But either way, any of these things, typically it's very bespoke. And so a client comes to you, and oftentimes no two clients are asking for the same thing. So you're constantly learning. Your team is constantly learning new things, which is actually one good thing. But the bad thing about that is that it's not easy to scale, because you're always like having to hire new people and skill up and train. And it's really hard to kind of systemize that and scale it to like anything substantial. So it's very hard to run a large, successful, full service or bespoke agency. You can charge oftentimes, pretty good for those, those things, which will help you, but it is actually still a negative in my opinion, compared to a productized service agency. So a productized service company or agency would be something where I actually have one service that I basically turn into a fixed price product. I'm selling it always the same way. There's very strict parameters around what I'm selling, and it's extremely scalable because I can create basically, I call it SOPs, there's other words for it, but it's standard operating procedures, or you can create basically like frameworks or playbooks around the service that you can train many people at scale, right? And so you can now have a team that is very cost effective, that can do that over and over again with predictable results, with the same quality. Think of McDonald's, or Starbucks, or your favorite franchise, and they basically every time you go in, you're expecting the exact same dish. It's going to always be the same coffee. It's always going to be what you're used to. This is what a productized service agency does versus a regular agency, where it's like kind of like a local cafe, where maybe the coffee is the same the next time you go in, but if you got a different barista there, maybe it's slightly different, right? So the pros of that company is typically the multiples are much higher. If you're going to sell it, it scales much more easily. It still has all the advantages of the other one, where the setup is very, very, very quick and inexpensive. I really like those types of companies. I'm actually working on shifting my agency right now to productized service offerings. So we're actually splitting it up, and we're going to be turning that's the goal, is to basically sort of replace the full service bespoke agency that I currently support and turn it into specific productized services. So big fan of that. The multiples, again, if you're selling it, are much higher typically because, again, it's more predictable. So that's going to increase the value for a potential buyer. Next one up is a physical product. Okay, so this is another business that you can choose to operate or create. The great thing about that is now you're no longer trading time for money. You're basically building something that you're selling over and over and over again. So you're manufacturing something. You could do food, you could do a physical product, or you could do a digital product, okay? So of those three, I would say digital is probably the most valuable for one simple reason. It basically typically has much higher multiples. It has oftentimes much higher margins, so the profit margins of those businesses are very high, and higher than everything else we've just talked about, because it's a digital product. So you build it, and then you're selling it over and over again, and it's almost all profit after the investment of building out that digital product. It's one of my favorite business models is coming up with a digital product business, because it's so valuable over time, and it scales really nicely because it can be global. You don't have to worry about logistics and shipping. I've worked on businesses like I mentioned, related to food, and you have like cold chain supply issues, and where the food can go bad if it's not kept at a perfect temperature, and all this crazy stuff, right? So you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's just pixels, right? It's data. So pixels, it's data. I'm talking too much about web design all the time. Pixel perfect, design. So basically, if I'm starting a business today and it's starting fresh, I'm going to say that's probably the best one to start with. Beyond one other one I'm going to talk about in a second. That one would be a really good one, and there's lots of types of digital products. So you could do a course that you record that you resell. There is some support there, so there is some time in consideration with that. It's also oftentimes tied to the person that's doing the course, so there might be some handicaps there if you're trying to sell it. You can do books. I'm actually working on digital products that are basically in the form of books right now. That could also be audiobooks. Podcasts are a digital product of sorts. Lots of different types of options there. And of course, common ones are software. So basically creating an app in the App Store that you're selling, multiple times. Every time somebody downloads it, they're getting the pro version. If they upgrade to the pro version, you're making money there. Again, love that one. Physical products are really cool though. I love physical products because, I just like the tangibility of them. They're much more challenging though. All the advantages that we just talked about with digital, you don't get any of those advantages. But they're cool, they're awesome. If you are passionate about a space, it's really good to have something physical. It feels so good to watch somebody use or eat or whatever, something you've made, physically, tangibly, you can touch and feel. So I think that there's a lot of sort of emotional value with a physical product. And so I really love physical product businesses, but they're much, much more difficult. Margins are typically lower, not always, but they're typically lower because they're so much more complicated. When you have a situation like we just went through with COVID, supply chain messes up, all of a sudden you can't get, your manufacturer shuts down, you're done. Whereas digital products were thriving during the coronavirus period, right? So you have all of these sort of disadvantages, but I do think it's a good one because you're not trading time for money again. It's one of those ones that scales really nicely. You're not trading time for money, and the cool factor is right there. I love those types of businesses personally. The next one here is when you start getting into some more there's some sophisticated business models which have extremely high margins, but they're really hard. So back up. I'm sorry. I'm going to back up 1 second. The big disadvantage with physical products is the costs. The startup costs are typically way higher, right? Because you have to basically have inventory. You have to build something, so you have to manufacture. There's a cost and investment to manufacture. Now, the workaround to that is you could start with something like a drop shipping sort of experience, where you start to build an audience around a particular topic, and then over time you reinvest in building your own product instead of drop shipping somebody else's product. Drop shipping is just simply where you have somebody who provides you with products on demand, that they manufacture, that they're holding in inventory, and all your job is just to really sell it, and then you basically ship the product to that customer. And so that's a great way to start. If you are thinking about starting a physical product business, I would suggest considering experimenting in that same niche, like in that same sort of topic that you're interested in, with a dropship product, because now you don't have any of the risk. You're obviously not getting a lot of the upside, but you don't have any of the risk. And if you like that market, you like that customer, you like marketing that type of product, now you can go and invent your own better, with higher margins, with more ability to brand it with more control, and then that becomes like your future very successful business at scale. Okay, so again, that's a whole other business model, technically, a drop shipping company, but again, I would almost put that in as a digital product, in a lot of ways, because it's the same thing where you're basically, there's no inventory, you're selling things that you're basically using a digital experience to basically sell them. The next one I mentioned to you, now shifting forward again, I'm getting into a more complicated business. We're going to start talking about things like marketplaces. Now, marketplaces like Airbnb, like Uber, using popular ones that you've heard before, those businesses are extremely valuable. You could also think of networks as another one. So like Facebook, like Google for search. These are powerful big businesses with network effects, meaning that they basically get more valuable the more people that are in the network, which makes them even more, more valuable if you sold them or if they go public or whatever. So these businesses are, not for the faint of heart. They're very typically difficult to start. They require a lot of capital to compete, so you typically have to raise money. That's a whole other topic. We could talk about raising money. I'm gonna talk about that. I have lots of perspective on that, but that's a whole other topic, because we want to talk about how you finance these businesses. That will be another video that you can find here on the channel. So here's the deal with those businesses. I've actually, like I said, I started a business that started as a digital product. The SaaS company was an app that you could download in the app stores, and then we were shifting it into being a marketplace. That's how we were going to monetize it. So instead of having just users, we had basically suppliers on the other side that were providing experiences for the users that we were turning into a marketplace. So now we have two types of customers. It was friggin' really hard. It was really hard. It required a ton of capital. It was very expensive. We didn't do it the right way, by the way. That business was not successful. I learned a ton. I would do it much differently. Hindsight's 2020 or whatever, but I would do it a lot differently now. But bottom line is that business had the most potentially, like if it was successful, in terms of like, when people talk about unicorns or billion-dollar plus valuation companies, they're talking oftentimes about those type of businesses. Those are the ones that scale nicely to billions of dollars, potentially, right? Because they're so massive, marketplace businesses. And again, once you get them going, they're so valuable because they have this lock-in effect where, it's hard to compete with them. Like how long has Google been around? How long has Facebook? These businesses, even though there's other incumbents that come along, they still don't replace them. They just like add to a growing market oftentimes, right? And those businesses are going to be, they're all of them are public now, so that is the business that, like, if you're chasing like, the big, the big social network dream, those are the businesses that you're going to build, right? You're going to raise money typically for those businesses, or you're going to be a multi-time entrepreneur who has you've already had a big payday and you're investing maybe some of your own money to get them started. I wouldn't recommend that for a first-time entrepreneur, even though you can raise money to have to have a shot at those businesses. And if you're in places like San Francisco, or maybe even New York or a few other cities around the world, maybe it is, the culture there is that, you go big or go home. And so maybe that's the type of business that you want to do. Most of us, I would say that it's probably not the best idea because the chances of success are very low. You're going to fail those businesses much more often than any of the other businesses I just mentioned. The other ones you can actually predictably not fail, which is pretty cool. We talk about entrepreneurship as sort of a failing culture where you fail, and then somebody succeeds like 20% of the time. Well, that's only with those type of businesses. My experience with other businesses is that it's much more predictable. You can actually line yourself up for a lot more success. And we'll get into that, maybe in more detail in a future episode here too on this channel. So I think I've covered most of the big ones. There's also obviously other ways to slice this pie. You can look at different like levels of businesses. So there's like hard tech businesses like biotech or aerospace, and that would be almost even like a different business model because the amount of expertise that's required to start those businesses is like puts them at at a barrier for most of us that is pretty unsurmountable, unless you are either extremely committed and dauntless in pursuing that business vision, and surround yourself with an amazing team and attracting an amazing team around an amazing mission, or you already have that expertise or that experience that you're bringing to the table, right? So with connections and all that other wonderful things. So anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there. Those are like the main businesses. Now, the last thing I will share, because I said I'm going to leave it there, but I'm actually going to give you that one I mentioned that I think is, if I'm starting today, is the best business to start in 2023 and onwards, hopefully for the foreseeable future, and that is a personal brand. So here's the cool thing about a personal brand, and I've been studying this for the market here. I'm not a personal brand expert, by the way. I'm actually just starting. This is a new channel for me, so this video is, whenever you're watching this, is one of the early videos in a series. I am just going down the path of personal branding, but I have studied the market now of personal branding. And the hugely powerful thing with personal branding is you could actually combine it with anything else I just mentioned into the future. And it will make any of those other businesses easier for you to execute, potentially, right? If you have a pretty strong personal brand. The other cool thing about personal branding is it allows you to kind of experiment with different things that you are passionate about and that an audience may want to pay you in some type of value for. And you can build products and services on top of your personal brand very naturally and very easily. And you get to sort of learn what it is that you like to do, what it is that you want to support and champion, what kind of products and services you may want to offer, and you get a conversation, two-way conversation with an audience. The other amazing thing is that if you shift it to something new in the future, hopefully much of that audience will come with you for that ride, because you build trust. People are buying into you, and not just that product or service. That's a big mistake I've made traditionally, is that I'll work on something, and then when I move on, even if it's successful, I really don't have much to show for it other than maybe like something on my LinkedIn, that says, hey, this guy did this thing in the past. So it doesn't really go along with you, whereas your personal brand goes along with you. So if I'm starting a business, now how do I monetize a personal brand? That's a whole other story. Again, you could start any other business on top of that. You could also sell ads, if you're on YouTube or on, whatever you're on. You, as an influencer, you could like work with brands. So there's lots of ways to monetize that. You could, run any other type of service on top of that. Like if I want to be a consultant in a specific space, it's way easier to sell my consultancy services if I'm an authority in that space as an influencer, right? Obviously, right? So again, there's many ways to monetize that. The big disadvantage I think people would cite is the fact that it's tied to you, and you are still in many ways trading time for money. However, over time, I think that disadvantage actually is not so great, because you could have spin-outs from your personal brand that is not trading time for money, and you could eventually just replace altogether that time and just do that just for the fun of it, because you love the things that you're talking about and the things you're representing, and have those other businesses heavy lift your income, and have the personal brand just be part of your story. It's just part of who you are. And so you don't necessarily have that same disadvantage that you have with the other businesses that trade time for money, like the agency model or the freelancer work, because it has more value than just, it has the value of your reputation, it has the value of your already baked in audience that those other businesses don't have, And so anyway, this has been it was somewhat a long video. I hope that you got a lot of value from it. If you are exploring starting something new today, whether it's a side hustle or a main thing, I wanted to share this video because I didn't really think about this stuff when I started out. Like I said, I just sort of fell into different businesses that I had, like, I think path of least resistance, that I had a bit of insight about, or some, I had some people around me that had done something similar, so it was easy for me to sort of just go, oh, that's a model that I could maybe replicate. Well, I think it's really important that you think about and study business models as much as you study the actual thing that you're selling, okay? And so I'm gonna leave you with that to think about, and leave a comment to let me know what you're starting, what you're thinking about. I'll respond to that. If I can provide you with any further advice, I will. And hopefully some future videos will also add to your your decision making here. Okay. Be well. We'll see you on the next side.